morning, everyone. My name is Christy McKenzie. I'm the Assistant Coordinator of Neighborhood Services for the Department of Senior Services of Erie County. Welcome to our 2021 Virtual Elder Law Day Summer Series. This series will continue to take place on Tuesday and Wednesday morning at 10 a.m., including a variety of topics. I would also like to take a moment to thank those individuals who have helped make this summer series possible again this year. Our County Executive, Mark Colin-Cars, Karen Nicholson, the CEO for the Center for Elder Law and Justice, and our Senior Services Commissioner, David Shank. This event will be recorded and found later on YouTube. Also, we are taking questions today at the end of the session, so please feel free to type them in our question and answer panel. Please refrain from using any personal information. Allow me to introduce our guest speakers. Sara Hedden is a staff attorney with the Kinship Care Legal Services Program at the Center for Elder Law and Justice. She represents non-parent relatives of children at risk of placement in foster care. Sara worked previously as a social worker in the child welfare system with a focus on mental health and substance use issues. We'll also be joined by Deonna Jones. Deonna is a newly admitted attorney and recently started her career as an assistant district attorney at the Erie County District Attorney's Office. Prior to joining the District Attorney's Office, Deonna was a staff attorney for Center for Elder Law and Justice. As a youth, Deonna spent approximately 15 years in and out of foster care, which included some traditional foster care homes and some kinship care placements. Deonna's last foster care placement was with a paternal grandmother who raised both Deonna and Deonna's sibling as her own. Welcome, Sara.
Thank you. Good morning. My video, and you can hear me? Everything's good?
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining me. So we'll start out talking about what is kinship care. So kinship care is, as Christine had mentioned, and the folks that I represent, non-parents caring for children. They can be relatives or they can be what we refer to as fictive kin. The majority are maternal grandparents. Over 50% are maternal grandparents. Very exciting. Less than a month ago, the governor signed into law the definition for kinship caregiver. Most other states have already had this defined. We now have an official definition signed into law, which will help with further legislative drafting, and it gives more clout to kinship caregivers. It's not just another term that we throw around, it's a real legal definition. I normally don't want to read from PowerPoints, but this is an important one. So a kinship caregiver is a relative or a non-relative who's acting in a parent role. They're related to the child through blood marriage or adoption, or they're related to a half-sibling of the child through blood marriage or adoption, so such as a step-parent of the child, or an adult with a positive prior relationship with the child, or a half-sibling of the child, or the child's parent, such as step-parent, godparent, neighbor, or family friend. But it's not limited to those categories of folks. It really can be anybody except for a non-relative certified foster parent. So anyone who had a relationship with the child prior to the child being placed with the caregiver or coming to live with that caregiver. Anyone who fits any of those categories is a kinship caregiver. So reasons why kids might need to be cared for someone other than their parents. Parents who might be unwilling or unable to care for their own children. There's so many reasons, as many reasons as there are kinship caregivers. So some parents are just too young to be able to. Parents as young as 13, 14, 15, they're just incapable. They're too young. They're still in school. They just don't have the emotional maturity, the ability to financially support themselves and their children. They might have mental or physical limitations, keeping them from being able to care for their children. There might have been abuse and neglect perpetrated by the parents on the children. Parental substance use or abuse that has affected the parent's ability to keep the child safe. The parent might have untreated mental health issues. And I just want to emphasize untreated, because there are untold numbers of parents who have mental health diagnoses and are successfully parenting their children. It's when parents have untreated mental health issues that are getting in the way of them being able to keep their children safe. When there is domestic violence or intimate partner violence in the home that the children are experiencing and is negatively affecting the children. Or when a parent is too ill to care for a child, when a parent dies or is incarcerated or is deployed by the military. Kinship care by the numbers, like so many things, people of color and Black children are disproportionately represented in kinship care and in non-relative foster care. So looking at all children, 1 in 11 of all children will live in a kinship home at some point, but 1 in 5 Black children will live in a kinship home. All told, just shy of 200,000 children in New York State live in a kinship home without their parents right now. The numbers are higher for younger children. As you see here, they decrease a little bit the older children get. And foster care numbers in 2020, just over 16,000 children lived in foster care, and nearly half of them were in foster care with a relative. Those numbers back in the 70s and 80s would have been almost 0 children in foster care with a relative. Foster care back then was non-relatives. Children were not placed with family. So why kinship care? So kinship care versus non-relative foster care, it reduces trauma. When kids can't be with their parents, this is a bold statement because there are very few absolutes in life. But when a child cannot be with their parent, I can say definitively that that child has experienced trauma. Just the act of the child not being able to be with their parent is a trauma. And it's likely that whatever led to the child not being able to be with that parent was an additional trauma. Maybe it was the death of the parent, and maybe that child saw the death of the parent. We unfortunately have represented multiple families where a parent had suffered a violent death. We represented kinship caregivers of a child where the child witnessed the parent's death, or the child witnessed violent domestic violence. We represented kinship caregivers where the child themselves have suffered some physical abuse, or the child had experienced neglect, including a household that was in deplorable living conditions, where there were substances available within the child's reach. All of those things constitute trauma. When a child is placed in a non-relative foster home, those are additional traumas. The child might be in a foster home with people who don't look like them. They might be a different race or ethnicity. They might speak a different language, be a different religion, attend a different church, or no church at all. Or they might attend church when the child had never attended a church before. They might say a prayer before dinner or not, and the child had never done that before, or they always had. They might eat different foods. They likely do eat different foods. The child might have to, and usually do, have to live in a different neighborhood, attend a different school. I work primarily in Niagara County. A large amount of children in foster care in Niagara County are from Niagara Falls, but the majority of foster homes are in the suburbs. So many children are taken from Niagara Falls and placed in Wheatfield or Pendleton or Cambria. So it's a very different lifestyle, and it looks very different for them. And it's just more and more trauma. Keeping kids with kin rather than non-relatives, it keeps families' ties and preserves parental rights. When kids are in non-relative foster care, ASFA applies. ASFA is a federal law, the Adoption and Safe Families Act. So technically it applies to all families, and when kids are removed from their parents, the Department of Social Services has to file a termination of parental rights petition within 15 months. But when kids are with family, the department is more lax with that. And if they're with family, they can take their time. And they understand that kids are with family, and family usually doesn't want for the parents' rights to be terminated. Grandma usually doesn't want to be mom. They want to be grandma, and they want mom's rights to remain intact and for her to be able to be mom, even if that looks different. And it increases positive long-term outcomes for children. ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey, and I'm going to spend a few slides talking about that, so I won't get into that right now. So ACEs, I won't read all this to you, but the slides are available. So I would like you to have this information. I'll get into a little bit for those of you who aren't familiar. So in the mid-90s, the CDC and Kaiser Permanente did this huge study in California. I'm not sure how many families were involved, but it was in the thousands. It was, they had these long questionnaires where people answered about their experiences from ages 0 until they turned 18, and they got a score. So the more adverse childhood experiences, such as experiencing violence, abuse, or neglect, witnessing violence, whether in their home or their community, or having a family member die by suicide or attempt suicide, or experiencing substance use problems, mental health problems, or instability due to being separated from a parent, such as being placed in kinship care or non-relative foster care. Those are all adverse childhood experiences. And the more of those a person experiences, the higher their score, and the more likely they are to experience problems in the future, such as poor physical health. So these ACEs scores are linked to chronic health problems, mental illness, substance use problems, can negatively impact education, job opportunities, earning potential. They can be prevented. And in my work, what I've seen a huge prevention of, or I guess not a prevention, but a mitigation of these outcomes are keeping children with kin. I just want to talk about ACEs a little bit more. So this is a really common 10-question survey that's taken from ACEs. So there are 10 categories. The original survey, which you can find for free online, has a lot more questions, but this is a summary. And so the higher you score, the more likely you are to have negative outcomes later in your life. So just a couple of examples. Did you lose a parent through death, divorce, abandonment, death, or another reason? Did a parent or adult in your home ever swear at you, insult you, or put you down? Did you feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were special? So for each of these that you experienced, you have 1 point, and then you add them up for a total of up to 10 points. So all these adversities have lasting impacts. So the more of these you have, the more likely you are to have some of these outcomes, including the TBI, mental health illnesses such as depression or anxiety, unintended pregnancies and complications with pregnancies, sexually transmitted diseases, chronic diseases such as cancer and diabetes, risky behaviors such as unsafe sex and substance use, and reduced opportunities related to education, occupation, and income. And this chart at first looks a little confusing, but this shows how adverse childhood experiences affect a person over their lifetime. So this right here, this is from a lifetime from conception to death. I hope you can see my, here, let's see, I think I can draw on it. Okay, so starting here at a lifetime from conception through death. So a person is born and they experience, so there's historical trauma before they're born in their family. So, you know, my mother experienced in her home domestic violence that her father perpetrated against her mother. So she carried that with her in her life, and those experiences affected her parenting of me. The social conditions that I was raised in that had been affected by my mother's experiences. The person that my mother chose in her life might have been somebody who resembled her father. And so I also experienced some domestic violence. This affected my neural development, which led to some impairment in my social, emotional, and cognitive impairment. So I have my ACE score is rising. I adopt some risky health behaviors, unintended pregnancy, drug use. I develop a mental health diagnosis and may not seek treatment. I develop some chronic health issues, which can lead to an early death. Oops, sorry, I have to turn off annotate. Oops, sorry, just before we leave ACEs. So I wanted to share this with you in case folks weren't too aware of the ACEs score. We often think of our social experiences and the way that we are brought up as separate from our health and well-being and our medical history and our medical experiences, but they're all connected. And there's not much control that we as individuals have over the way we're raised, for almost none. But as adults now and caregivers, and particularly kinship caregivers, the gift that kinship caregivers can give to their family is to help mitigate these issues. And even though children might have had some adverse childhood experiences, keeping them with family can help to mitigate those experiences and help children to have better outcomes in their lives going forward. I want to talk for a little bit about caregivers themselves and the things that they experience. So almost every client that I've ever met, the way the children come to be with them, it's never planned. Nobody ever intends to, and I'm going to talk about grandparents because that is typically the clients that I represent. So nobody has a child and intends to then, raise their children and then their grandchildren. They intend to be grandparents and be fun and here's some ice cream and I'll go back to your parents. That's what we want out of being grandparents. Not to have to do homework with them and send them to bed and parent again. But when CPS knocks on the door and says, can you take your grandkids? And if you can't, they're gonna have to go to foster care. Of course you're gonna say yes. And in that moment, all you wanna do is help your family and your grandkids, but there are unforeseen consequences. And these are not from my personal experience. I've not had to care for children who are not my own. And God willing, I won't have to. But some things that I've seen are burnout. Absolutely. A lot of it, I think, comes from one, not being ready, and two, caring for children that you didn't intend to care for. When you have a baby, whether it's a planned or unplanned pregnancy, you have time to plan for that and get ready. And then you have a little baby who goes through stages of development. You don't have, hey, here's a 5-year-old, good luck. And this 5-year-old comes with some trauma and history, and you've got to figure all that out and help them get through it. It's another thing that leads to burnout that you don't anticipate is these changing family relationships. In nearly all of the cases that I've worked on, the parents are initially so thankful that the caregiver took the children. They're thrilled that their parent took their children in and they helped their children stay out of foster care and stay with family. There was somebody that they can trust and the kids are safe and well cared for. But it doesn't take too long for the parents to change. And this happens in nearly all of my cases. The parents become resentful and they kind of change the narrative in their mind and they start to blame the caregiver. They somehow twist it around and it becomes the caregiver's fault that they're in this in the first place. There's a lot of reasons why that can happen. I don't really have time to get into that right now, but it's something that's really common. And even though I really help my clients not to internalize that, it's hard to take that blame constantly and not to internalize some of that. But there's also another aspect of that, those changing relationships that you were, let's say, grandma, mom, and child. Well, now grandma and mom are kind of mom and mom, or grandma became mom. Where does that leave mom? So all these relationships are shifting, and how do you handle that as a family? It's tough. There are resources available to help kinship families, but it's not enough. A lot of my families had been retired or working part-time, and it works. Some of them have had to take on more work or go back to work in retirement. I've had clients have to move and buy a different vehicle. I had one set of clients, they retired, they had a 1-bedroom apartment and a convertible. They had to move to a 3-bedroom apartment and buy a minivan. Of course, they did it for their grandkids, but they missed the convertible. They had to deal with their own feelings of resentment, guilt, bearing the brunt of undeserved blame. I have mentioned that. The resentment and guilt, they're feeling their own resentment towards their children, especially when they don't get a break. Like, oh, I'm dealing with this toddler who's just hysterical and they're always needing something. And you know what? Mom's out on the town. She's having fun. She doesn't have any responsibilities because she knows I'm caring for her kid. But also on the flip side, maybe mom's resentful towards grandma because grandma gets all this time with her child and mom only gets an hour a week, even 5 hours a week. That's not much in the life of a child. And maybe guilt because, you know, my other 3 kids turned out just fine. What's wrong with this one? Why isn't this one caring for her kids? What did I do wrong? Where did I go wrong? So many tough feelings to deal with. And being at a different stage than your peers. You know, if you're in your 60s and you've got 3 little kids and most of your friends don't have any little kids, they've got maybe kids in their 30s who are having kids and they're just grandparents 1 weekend a month, having fun sleepovers and doing fun stuff and sending the kids back home. But you have kids full time as if you're parenting again. That can be really isolating. You might spend less time with your friends. It can be very isolating. And just one thing I want to mention that I don't have on the slide is that I have seen, and it again circles back to money. I've seen clients sacrifice their needs for the kids, which we all do as parents, but a big one is medications and treatments that they need. Medications and co-pays can be very expensive, and I've had clients not take their medication or not take it as prescribed to stretch their money, and that's huge. You can't do that. You need to take care of yourself so that you can take care of the people that need you. I know we all hear that, and I as a mom hear that, and I sometimes don't take my own advice. Just want to quickly go through the services that we provide. So we've been representing Kinship Caregivers since 2005, so 16 years now. We started in Erie County with 1 attorney. We're now in Erie and Niagara attorney. We have 1 supervising attorney, myself, 2 full-time staff attorneys, 1 part-time for now. She'll be transitioning out. And we hired 1 full-time law graduate. So once she's admitted to the bar, we'll then have 3 full-time staff attorneys. We have 1 full-time paralegal and 1 part-time social worker. She works for Celljoy full-time and helps out wherever she's needed in any of our units. She's fabulous. Here's our staff. So this is me, Rhonda, our social worker, Gabe, our newest staff attorney, Laura, our part-time staff attorney, and Cheryl, our paralegal. And here's Dave, my favorite picture of him, working from home on Zoom, because you only have to look like an attorney from the top up when you're doing remote court. So our qualifications, you just have to be the non-parent caregiver of a child or seeking to care for a child who's at risk of foster care. We do have income limits depending on the situation and reside in Erie or Niagara County. I would say if you're caring for a child who's not yours or seeking to, just give us a call and we can talk about whether you qualify or not. The types of cases we take, again, any non-parent caregiver who is currently caring for a child at risk of out-of-home placement, seeking to care for a child who's out of risk of out-of-home placement, or who is placed in a non-relative setting, whether it's foster care, a residential treatment facility, a group home, something like that. The type of work that we do, we represented all types of the case through the civil legal matter. Most of our work is in family court on the neglect, custody matter. We do some child support work if it's related, family offense work a little bit if it's related. We sometimes go to Supreme Court, integrated domestic violence, surrogates court, and appeals cases, rarely. and administrative proceedings such as fair hearings if you have an indicated CPS report and it's related to the case. We provide very holistic services. So as I said, we have paralegals, social workers, interns. We had a fellow this summer who can assist with non-legal needs. So we help staff complete applications for cash assistance, food stamps. We link to other services such as this excellent program that provides diapers and wipes each month for people who are caring for a child 3 years old and under. We're currently running a Kinship caregiver support group that has, we just had our 3rd session last night and it's going really well. And we provide advice, referrals, and interventions regarding really any issues that might affect the caregiver's ability to maintain the child in their home. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Deonna. So I had the pleasure of meeting Deonna. I think she was only with us for about 2 months. She worked in our housing unit until her dream job came through at the DA's office. So I had presented briefly at a staff meeting on the work that we do, and she piped up and shared a little bit about her story. So I reached out to her after and I asked if she would like to present with me, and she was thrilled to. So I'm so excited to hear more from Deonna and for her to share with everybody about her experience and where she is now. So although I'm sad that she's not with us at SLJ, I'm thrilled that she is doing the work that she really wanted to do and that she's here today to share with all of us. So take it away, Deonna.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me. And I just want to echo, I love SLJ. And if it were not for this job, I would definitely still be at SLJ. So what I would like to do is just first, I guess, tell some about my foster care experience. So I entered foster care when I was about 7 years old. As far as I could remember, I was told maybe I was in foster care before that. And through foster care, I was in both traditional foster homes and also a few kinship care placements. And some of the things on the slides that I saw about like the ACEs and some of the guilt from both parents and also grandparents. I just kind of want to go over that kind of stuff because through my experience, I've seen a lot of both sides. So just to kind of start off, my last foster care placement was with my paternal grandmother, who took both me and my 2 siblings that were not her grandchildren in, and she adopted them and kept me on as a foster. And in that experience, just the last few slides that you were talking about, with like the ACEs and the different levels of trauma that children experience, because prior to that, I was in a few foster homes. I kind of, I guess, built up some trauma that I believe one of the hardest parts for my kinship home placement with my grandmother was I don't believe she was fully trained on how to deal with that or fully aware that foster care youth came with that type of trauma. So she just saw me as her grandchild, and I need to do what she said. But what she wasn't aware of is that I had a lot of anger and resentment towards, honestly, when I was that young, everyone. And so, and also, you spoke about parents and sometimes how they're happy at first and then it just kind of the relationship goes south. I actually had that experience. My mother was very grateful to my grandmother at first, but with her struggles with addiction and her depression, she kind of switched, and my grandmother was, I guess, the enemy to her. And so it was kind of at times a kind of a hostile environment because it was kind of like I was stuck in between 2 sides that was it wasn't it was kind of illusionary because my grandmother was not the bad guy. She was the person helping. And just to back up, prior to that placement, I was also in care of my maternal uncle, who was a college student when he took me in. I believe it was the first year of high school for me. And my mother and her brother were very close, and they experienced kind of the same thing, same sour relationship. But I do want to mention that kinship care for me, while it came with a lot of troubles, not troubles, a lot of struggles, as far as me being settled, it was a million times better than actual foster care placements. Because in traditional foster care placements, there were times where I was actually picked up from school by social workers, and I remember one specific time, police officers, and taken to a home with complete strangers and left there. And the environment there was kind of cold, whereas when you're in foster care placements that are kinship care, you have family. You're able to continue to see family. So just wanted to mention that. And then I was also placed in kinship care, a kinship care placement with a cousin, an older cousin who was kind of like an aunt to me. And honestly, that was one of the best situations for me when I was very young. And so I'm sorry, I kind of jump around a little bit, but I was in foster care for about 15 years, and my foster care experience was on and off because the courts, my mother, she did very good at her programs, and so I was often replaced back home and kind of taken back and forth. And that goes towards the ACEs slides that you were presenting, and something that I kind of studied myself. The constant replacement builds up trauma. But when I speak of foster care, I like to shine light on the bright side, because a lot of people believe that they see youth that were in foster care and they just see a hard story. But my shining light for foster care is every 6 months I was required to go to my permanency hearing. And through my permanency hearing, I was assigned a legal aid attorney to represent me. And throughout the process, that was confusing and back and forth. She was the only person that really explained to me what was going on. She was the only person that wasn't just placing me and moving me around. And that actually sparked my interest in becoming an attorney, because the courtroom was kind of, it became a place that I visited frequently, and it honestly, it was the coolest place that I visited frequently. So I just want to highlight that. Sorry, Sarah, can I just ask you a quick question?
Absolutely.
Are there any specific areas or slides that you would like me to share more feedback on? Because I know I'm kind of talking fast and I feel like I'm moving too fast
Oh,
already.
oh, you're fine. So our audience, I think it would be mostly kinship caregivers. And as I'm listening to you talk, I'm just thinking about, I've been representing kinship caregivers for almost 7 years. And in listening to you, this is the first time I've spoken with or listened to a youth who grew up in foster care and in kinship caregiver homes. So just hearing about your experience and what it was like for you and how much better it was being with family, even if that family wasn't perfect, that was best for you. It's just nice to hear that the work we're doing and that all of this hard emotional stuff that the family members do, that it's worth it, even though it's hard at times and the kids might give them a hard time. When I am speaking with, and I'm here, I am kind of rambling when clients call me and say, Emily's giving me a really hard time and it's just tough. I think it's kind of a good sign because the kids feel safe there. They know that they can express themselves, and they're not worried about, like you said, a social worker showing up at school at the end of the day and saying, well, you're at a new home now.
Yes.
You feel
So
you're safe. Sorry, go ahead.
With you saying that kind of, I actually recently had a conversation with my uncle, who I who used to care for me, and my grandmother, who, you know, is, to me, she's my grandmother, but she's also kind of like my mother. She's recently become a little ill, and I called because, to me and my grandmother had like a love-hate relationship. We are both Tauruses, so a lot of people say that, you know, Tauruses bump heads. But he was explaining to me that I was kind of what everyone said I was. I was kind of a hothead when I was younger, and I was angry. I remember being angry, and I remember taking my anger out on the people that were there. And we now have a really close relationship. Me and my grandmother are really close. I hang with her all the time. But back then, she was like the person I couldn't stand coming home to see because we bumped heads. And he explained to me, he said, I remember when you were bad and she called, and I would go over and I would talk to her when you weren't around, and the look of desperation in her eye to connect with you or to keep you on the right path, um it just showed me that uh like foster care youth, they have things that they don't even talk about that hurt them, and so they build up a wall. And to know that in her my grandmother is very firm. In her very firm way, she was still trying to break through the wall, even though she didn't fully understand, to me, what I had been through. And also, about 3 years ago, my younger brother and I sat down and we were talking to her, and we were explaining to her, you know, Grandma, when you used to yell at us about this, and this, you know, it hurt us. And when you used to say this, you know, say certain things, it kind of triggered us because we had been through situations where nothing was stable. And then we come here and it's stable. And, you know, she was very frustrated with us sometimes. And she would say, you know, um, if you don't want to be here, you don't have to be here. And she didn't realize, to us, that was a threat of being basically put back into foster care. And she didn't realize how much, you know, that could hurt us or trigger us at that age. So what I would say to caregivers, is just to kind of stick it out with them, because I wouldn't say go try to talk to them, or you could try to talk to them, but at when I was 16 years old, or even when I was 18 years old, I don't think I would have ever been open to have a conversation like the one I'm having right now, or even articulate what the problem was, or even to accept that I was some of the problem. To me, the only person that was the problem was my mother. And to me, if anybody asked me at that age, I go take it out with my mother. I didn't ask to be here, and I was angry. um, so that's what I would say about that: to be patient and to understand that um, youth that are moved around a lot, they have a lot of um, resentment, and the resentment may not even be towards the caregivers. It could be towards their parents. But one thing that I dealt with was I was very loyal to my mother, so I never wanted to present like I was angry at her. um so I would be angry at everyone else, but deep down inside, I had a lot of hatred in my heart when I was younger for my mother, because I felt like she was the one that let me down, and she stuck me with these people that weren't her. And I had to deal with a new set of rules, and I had to adjust to their way of living, and I couldn't be with her. And it hurt to not be with your parents, no matter hard it how toxic or bad the environment was. I still wanted to be with my mother.
It's so that's something I've seen time and again when I was a foster care worker and now as an attorney, that no matter what mistakes parents have made, children always want their parents. Um, and it's interesting that you said you had all this anger and hatred, and you know, even if you had some faults, you didn't recognize them. You put all the blame on your mother, but God help anyone else who put blame on your mother, that you were so protective of her. um,
Absolutely.
yeah. And you said that, you know, at that age, you weren't ready to talk to anybody. Um, with all this hindsight you have now, some years later, can you think of anything that would have helped you that like your grandmother or your uncle or any family members could have done, or like a safe space or something they could have done to help you express that, or anything that, any words of advice, I guess I'm asking, that could help folks? And if not, that's okay. I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot here.
So I was very involved. So some of the trauma, I later went to counseling when I was in college. Some of the trauma that I experienced, I found out that it was kind of hidden because I kind of always put myself into something. I played basketball, I ran track, I did cheerleading, I had a job, I did after school. I was really, really busy. And like my basketball coach, she was my go-to. I don't know if I really talked about my mother, but I talked to her more than I honestly talked to my grandmother. So what I would recommend is encourage outlets, not force them, because again, youth are at a position where they already have to listen to, grandmother saying more than just, here's ice cream. But just encourage outlets, find out interests, talk to them about their interests, and I just kind of be there. One thing that kind of hurt me was my grandmother didn't come to my sporting events. And I know why she didn't come, because I wasn't nice when I was at home, but I still wanted her to be there. Because she was, my parent. So I just say be there and be available. And I know it's hard to be available for someone who on every surface is showing you they don't want you there. Um, but they just don't know how to accept you being there, because the face they want to see being there can't, because of whatever their issues are.
So just kind of be there quietly in the back. Don't make a big deal out of it, but just quietly be there so they know you're there. That makes
Yes.
sense.
One thing, and I can't really completely speak on my brother and sister's thought process, but my brother and sister, they were actually adopted by my paternal grandmother. And my little sister was maybe 4 when we first moved with her, and my brother, I think, was 8. And so for my sister, my grandmother was her mother, and um she was kind of everything to her. She is everything to her, but specifically when she lived with her when we were younger, she was everything to her. But my sister was like just the wild child, the youngest. So I don't know if anyone like has younger children, but just be patient with them, because I believe that my sister's age and her kind of unawareness to everything going on also caused her to act out. Even though she didn't completely experience living with my mother and actually missing my mother, I have a bigger family. So I have a lot of aunts and I have a lot of uncles, and my grandmother is everybody's everything. And so us living with my grandmother, sometimes it was hard for me, and I imagine my sister, to share what is your mother with everyone. Um, and so also kind of, I guess, be aware of that dynamic, because sometimes it's hard to not, when you have your mother, you have like, this is my mother. But when your mother is grandma and you have a big family, it's that was also something hard for us to deal with. And one thing that I would encourage is create some normal, like, I guess, one thing my grandmother used to say, that was hurtful to me, because my brother and sister were not, I guess, blood related to her. So when they were younger, she stopped saying it after a while, but she referred to them as her foster children. Um, and to be in such a permanent place and still be referred to as foster children, um, it was hurtful. So just be aware of the words that you're using, because children hold on to things. They hold on. They hear one word. She could have said many good things around the word foster children, but all I heard was foster children. And whether she was talking about me or just them, it hurt, and I didn't like it. So be aware of the dynamics.
That's a good point. Language is huge. And just to help people think about that, one thing I think about throughout our lives, there are certain things that people have said to us. And I'm sure we all have examples of this, maybe something a professor said or a mentor, a coach, something that really stuck with you. And that person may have no recollection of it. I'm sure your grandmother meant no harm. It was just words that she used and she had no idea that it bothered you unless you had said something. And knowing, like, I think back to a few of those memories that I have, and I'm sure the person has no clue. So I think, what have I said to somebody else that has stuck with them throughout their lives and that I don't know? And I hope they were positive things and not negative things. And reminding myself that I might have had a huge impact on somebody else and it might have been negative helps me to remember to be really careful with my words in general, whether with kids or adults, just to be very careful and mindful.
So I have a 8-year-old daughter, and one of my biggest, I guess, goals, it's not really a goal, but one thing I could never have happen is her end up in foster care and go through what I went through. Or even, like, sometimes I get down on myself, because once you've been in a position where your parent wasn't a great parent, it puts a lot of weight on you to be a great parent. So I try my best. I am not the best, but I try to watch what I say to her or watch what I do around her, or just make sure I don't mimic any signs of anything that, not anything. My mother has great qualities, but the things that were bad, I guess, according to the court, and also some of her actions that I saw, I try to keep that away from my daughter as much as possible. So it puts being a foster care youth, and actually sometimes people say foster care alumni, being a foster care alumni puts a lot of pressure to be a better parent than you've ever seen.
I like that, foster care alumni. I haven't heard that, and I like it. It's very it sounds positive to me.
I think it's important to take a positive look. While I was in foster care, I went to something called a foster care speak out. And my first speak out was like, if anybody was in the room and they didn't cry, they had to be heartless, because you heard stories about what foster care youth went through in the homes, the foster homes, what they went through in their previous homes, how they couldn't see their family. And it was harsh. But as I got older and I continued to go to them, they changed. It was more positive. They were actually, the panelists were people that were had power to maybe change some legislation or sat on a bench in family court, but they started to say thank you for doing this, and thank you for implementing that, and thank you for removing me from a situation where I wouldn't be the person I am today. So there is a lot of positive that comes from foster care. It's just, like me, when I was in it, I could not see it. It was a curse. A lot of people ask me to share my story, and I will say, if I had time, I'll tell you the start to the end. But when I was in foster care, it was like a curse word. It was a word that I didn't want anyone to know, no one to know that I was in foster care, because it was a stigma.
Thank you, Deonna, for sharing your story. It was great to hear. There was a comment. Thank you for referencing the terms and words that some people will use towards children, and that the children will hold on to them, such as foster child. So those are things people probably don't think of on a regular basis. Another comment came in privately. Do you have a relationship with your mother now?
Yes, my mother is honestly my best friend. If anyone called me, I'd probably call her on my way out to tell her about this. We talk all the time. Does she drive me crazy? Absolutely. When I was younger, I grew a hate for her, especially because I felt like my brother and sister didn't have the connection that I did. Um, but I'm big on church, so that helped me move past that. But I tell my mother everything.
Great. And thank you. So I don't see any other questions. Thank you, Sarah, for all the great information you provided today as well. I hope everyone learned a lot.
There were there were two in the Q&A.
Is there another one?
Yep. So there were two. I tried to answer one, but I couldn't send it. So the easy one to answer says, will you be going over resources available? There are so many. So I would just like to share one website. Oh, I can. Oh, I figured out how to send it. I don't know if it went to everybody. I typed in the website New York State Navigator. So nysnavigator.org. So that's a statewide resource for kinship navigators. They have tons of resources, and you can also call and speak with somebody. I think they staff their lines either 8 to 4 or 9 to 5. It's a toll-free number. They're a nonprofit. They're funded by New York State, and they fund 14 local nonprofit programs that serve 25 counties supporting kinship caregivers. And their website has a lot of resources on it. And the other question is, why do you think the majority of foster homes are in the suburbs? So this is a little bit of a hairier question, and my comments will really only apply to Niagara County because that's primarily where I work and where I live. So this is what I've seen, and this is really anecdotal, and it's just my opinion. So looking at Niagara County and Niagara Falls specifically, the population in Niagara Falls, one, there's a ton of abandoned homes. There are few jobs. Niagara Falls was a really thriving city until the 50s when a lot of businesses closed and moved out and nothing replaced them. So it's a really poor city. It's primarily minorities, primarily renters and absent landlords. um, Looking at white flight is huge in Niagara County. And if you look at, so the Star Point School District, that's one of the bigger, more like higher ranked schools in Niagara County. It's made up of like 5 towns. One of the towns, because I had to do some research for this college project, is Pendleton, and it's like 99 point something white people. If you look for rentals in the district, there are like 2, and there's almost never any rentals. So that district has, it's almost all white kids coming from homes where their families own their homes. So it's just the demographic of the county. Black people are disproportionately represented in calls made to the CPS hotline, in indicated reports coming out of those calls, in neglect filings made against them, and in removals of their children. There are so many reasons for this, but certainly institutional racism is one of them. I know that Erie County has instituted a blind review process, which is really amazing. I don't know a ton about it, but I do know that they take the facts of cases and remove any identifying information that would clue people into race or anything that might identify people. So they take out the names and any other demographics, and they have people that aren't involved in the case review the case to determine whether the people who made the decisions, whether the reviewers would have made the same decisions, to see if any internal biases affected those decisions. So there are some newer efforts being made to reduce internal bias and institutional racism. It's in its infancy, but they're getting there. I think another reason is just people who have more money and live in suburbs have more time to be able to certify as foster parents and invest in doing that kind of resource, where the people who live in the cities in this county particularly are having to be more focused on just earning wages and getting through day to day and paycheck to paycheck. I don't know how familiar everyone is with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I might be getting too far into this, but if your main focus is on just getting your housing and food and basic needs met, you're not going to be able to go much beyond that and do things like volunteer or certify as a foster parent. So there's my long rambling answer to that question. And again, it's just anecdotal and just my opinion.
Thank you, Sarah. Do you see any more questions? I don't see any on my end.
No, nope, that was it.
Well, again, thank you, ladies, for sharing your story, Deonna, and all the information you provided, Sarah. Thank you, everyone, for joining our presentation today. I hope